Good evening. The RUC recovered a stash of pipe bombs in Lurgan today. They're lethal weapons. Loyalists use them on a weekly basis, and this week they murdered with one. Since the Good Friday Agreement, there have been averaging 2 attacks a week with some sort of bomb, and yet the government says all ceasefires are intact. They were reviewing them today. But even the dogs in the street appear to know better than that. But then again, the dogs don't carry political baggage. The representatives of the PUP and the UDP are here, but first, the inside.
Tragically, it was only a matter of time until the Loyalist dissidents claimed another victim. During the early hours of Saturday morning, Elizabeth O'Neill was killed by a pipe bomb, the latest in a long line of incidents stretching back to the Good Friday Agreement. Police say Loyalists have carried out at least 135 attacks using pipe bombs, blast bombs and grenades. To the O'Neill family, it doesn't matter who threw the device: LVF, Red Hand Defenders, UFF or Orange Volunteers. So far, the RUC haven't said who was responsible, whether it was dissidents or a group allegedly on ceasefire. But let's face it, all the terrorists, Loyalist and Republican, have at some stage broken their truce. There are only 2 terrorist organisations in Portadown which have the capability of carrying out an attack such as the murder of Elizabeth O'Neill: the LVF and the Red Hand Defenders. The LVF, which has already denied its responsibility, has been in disarray in the town since the death of Billy Wright and the jailing of his close friend Mark Fulton. The Red Hand Defenders do have a presence here, but many Loyalists feel they were not responsible for last weekend's murder. Dissidents on both sides have taken up the sword laid down by the mainstream paramilitaries. Republicans and Loyalists have both killed. But while Republican violence has waned, hardline Loyalists, believing the Republican movement has got it all its own way, are engaged in a concerted campaign of violent intimidation. Since Good Friday last year, there has been on average an attack every 3 days. The Orange Volunteers first appeared to admit a series of arson attacks on Catholic churches. The Red Hand Defenders admitted murdering Belfast man Brian Service, RUC Constable Frankie O'Reilly and prominent solicitor Rosemary Nelson. But the Red Hand Defenders' favoured weapon is the pipe bomb, easy to make and deadly. The O'Neill family were just like the victims of other recent Loyalist attacks, perceived to be Catholics and living in a vulnerable area.
There's shock and horror in the Loyalist community here in Portadown. When I was in the Corcoran Estates in the early hours of Saturday morning, there was just a total air of disbelief that a family who had been living for so long in the area had become the latest victims of basically what is the tragedy of Portadown. Do people suggest that the murder is linked to the drum crew, or to see it as a wider disenchantment with the peace process in general? Drum crew is an emotive issue and has been the past 11 months. I think if any individual wants a reason to act in an unlawful and sectarian manner, I think he will get that reason no matter where he is. He can justify his actions by his interpretation of events. Portadown Loyalist Ivor Young has been active in his support for the Drumcree Orange Men.
Well, I honestly think that the morale now is down because this lady has been well known in the Loyalist community and her family's been well known. But coming up to the 12th of July and all, I think the morale will come right back up again. I mean, we've been living this type of life for 30 years. And we've seen what happened with Billy Wright. Morale went right down when that happened, but it came back up again. And I can't see that breaking the spirit of the Loyalist people here at all. I know it's a sad thing, and I'd just like to say to the family, I regret what's happened to your mother, and I sincerely hope that you don't blame anybody until they're actually charged.
With a severely weakened LVF in Portadown, their former associates in the UVF are seeking to re-establish themselves in the town's estates. So could Elizabeth O'Neill's murder have been part of a callous attempt to regain the upper hand?
I would say that with loss and Billy Wright and I think Mark Fulton. They lost 2 good leaders in that organisation, and I think the morale would be down. But as I say, it's down 1 month, and it could be up the next month. And as I say, they've said they're on ceasefire, and I would take their word for it.
With 16 of its prisoners still awaiting early release from the maze, the LVF was always unlikely to admit murdering Mrs. O'Neill. With no prisoners to worry about, the Red Hand defenders have proudly boasted of their sectarian exploits across Northern Ireland. Despite the frequency of the attacks over the past year, the RUC has had little success in identifying, never mind bringing to justice, those responsible.
I think it's fair to say there are questions being asked. It's clearly a very difficult and complex task for the RUC, and you have to remember they lost Constable O'Reilly. The same people who killed Constable O'Reilly in Portadown are basically the same people, and their associates are involved in these attacks in North and West Belfast and East and South Antrim. So it's very much in everybody's interest that they're brought to justice. But there is clearly a feeling that, given the sheer scale of the Loyalist campaign throughout this year, that it's been an area for concern. That there's been not a huge degree of progress in terms of convictions, in terms of seizures, in terms of arrests. Now, we have seen a couple of seizures in the last week or two, which have been noted and are certainly represent a step in the right direction. But given the scale of what's been going on, I think the public are entitled to believe, and I believe our readers would expect, a much more comprehensive response than has been, in terms of results, than has been the case to date.
These are the pipe bombs seized in Larne and Carrickfergus last week. They're identical to the device used to kill Elizabeth O'Neill. Loyalist dissidents unable to get their hands on more sophisticated weapons are making these pipe bombs simply and cheaply. Police are concerned they may be produced en masse in the run-up to Drumcree. In East Antrim, they've been used in numerous attacks, forcing Catholic families from their homes.
What has been your experience of the attacks on the Catholics? I'm sure on the Catholic families here in Carrickfergus. I'm sure you've spoken to many of them.
Well, I've spoken to them all, to be honest, and there is a great deal of hurt because many of these people had lived in their homes, just like the police personnel, for many, many years, and they had played a full part in the local community. And for thugs, because that's the only way you can describe them, and they're in a very, very small minority, that they came along and have created the havoc.
I must say that I don't justify it. I'm not attempting to justify it in any way, but I'm trying to analyse the situation, trying to get a feeling as to what is going on in our community, and try to get behind the thinking of those in the community who would resort to such tactics, and going about and talking to people. I can hear the anger. Many of the reasons that they would give to me, I certainly agree with. I agree that our culture, our heritage, has been taken from us, and Protestants are being denied these things. And because they are being denied, then those people are saying, look, the IRA put up a campaign. They went out and fought a war, and they weren't properly dealt with by the security forces, and the government at the end of the day made a phony peace with them, and that has given them an incentive to go on and carry out these attacks. And I think it's wrong, and I think that the British government must pay the price for the atmosphere in which it is set in Northern Ireland today, and I blame them.
While most of the attacks have been carried out by the Red Hand Defenders or Orange Volunteers, seasoned terrorists belonging to one mainstream paramilitary organisation have also returned to war in the last weeks.
I noticed 2 people stand at the exit door of the Red Devil Bar, which we also cover. Took a look up and down the road down Broadway, just on security grounds. As I turned my back and came back into Caffrey's bar, there was a mini explosion.
The potential for mass murder at 2 adjacent bars on Belfast Falls Road is obvious.
The Red Devil Bar is a small family bar. It's a homely place where you sit and enjoy a pint, a bit of crack, from your neighbours and friends, and it does get a good wee crowd. It's a very enclosed bar. Like a native that type getting in there would cause definitely a lot of fatalities. The same with Caffrey's bar, slightly bigger, but a bigger crowd of maybe 250 people or more in the bar on a Thursday night. It's really big crowds. And again, you could have been a lot more deaths.
It is an open secret among senior RUC officers that the grenade attack was carried out by the UFFC company, the murderous Shankill Road team formerly led by Johnny Adair. Adair, presently serving 16 years for directing terrorism, threatened 3 years ago that he would wreck any peace process. These are his actual words, secretly recorded by police.
We're going to get peace. We're going to get peace. That's why I'm afraid. He'll never have peace. What's that much about bad cars? He's big peace. I have some friends started upset now. Where's the chance of getting it? The establishment has fucked me about for 20 odd years. Do you think if I was going to say peace, I'm going to come out and say, I'm with you. 20 years? Shove your dog.
The Falls Road attack wasn't the only murder attempt by the UFF in the last 6 weeks. Frank Pettigrew, a Catholic community worker, crossed the peace line to leave a Protestant teenager home on the Shankill.
Well, it used to trouble a girl up being nothing, so that. And never thought anything like that would ever happen, but the peace process been on. I drove down the streets in East Street West and I seen a young lad stand on the corner, and he was very afraid looking, and it made me suspicious. And I knew something was going to happen, so when I drove around the corner to let the wee girl off, the wee girl more or less just got out of the car, and another come on run out, and I put my foot aboard and drove away, and a couple of shots was fired.
These two attacks and the UFF's murder attempt at a bookmaker's in Ardoyne in early May have renewed the kind of fear among nationalists last seen during Johnny Adair's command of C Company.
Well, I mean, obviously, if the UFF if they are becoming re-involved in violence, I mean, that brings a whole new dimension to it, because obviously the UFF are an organisation who have been around for a very long time, and obviously that gains experience for the individual members at the ground level, or for want of a better term, the foot soldiers. And I mean, if honestly also to be told, the UFF showed some very severe forms of violent activity in the past. They have a long-term strategy to try and bring some Republican paramilitary drag into the campaign of violence again. And I think that's a message I think that the Republican organisations need to, I think they have taken that on board very strongly. But the fear in the Catholic communities and nationalist communities at the moment is seriously very strong.
The RUC has so far refused to officially confirm the UFF has broken its ceasefire. But we know who was involved, and we have no doubt they are members of the Ulster Freedom Fighters. We also know that the 6 UFF commanders summoned the leaders of their political wing to a meeting on the Shankill at the start of last month and warned them of growing disaffection amongst their members. They felt the government was giving too much ground to Republicans, and with no assembly members themselves, they were being excluded from the political process, particularly discussions on decommissioning. On top of that, some wanted revenge after Johnny Adair claimed he had been shot by Republicans while he was out on parole. UDP leader Gary McMichael took the message to Stormont. We know his meeting with Mo Mowlam on May 12th was blunt, even bad-tempered. The UFF felt the Secretary of State neither understood nor particularly cared about their concerns. 9 days later, they tried to bomb the Falls bars and shoot Frank Pettigrew. Mo Mowlam phoned Gary McMichael. Clearly, she considered it possible the UFF was responsible. She warned him if they were, no more UFF prisoners would be released. We believe that since that warning, the UFF commanders met and ordered an end to the attacks. This afternoon, the UFF made this statement to Insight. The organisation says it's committed to peace and described speculation that it was involved in recent attacks as contrived and untrue. It says it's the largest armed group on the Loyalist side and remains unified and strong, but it accused the government of adopting a partisan policy favouring nationalists. Whatever the UFF says, we believe it did carry out those recent attacks. The Chief Constable remains undecided. He told us, "We have nothing to suggest that organisationally as a whole, the UFF has broken its definition of a cessation of military operations. That doesn't rule out the possibility that individual members of that organisation have been engaged in recent violence and were at this stage keeping an open mind about that possibility. Eddie Kinner, who served a life sentence for murder, lives on the Shankill Road. He believes it's the Loyalist dissidents rather than the mainstream paramilitaries who pose a real and increasing threat.
Well, I mean, in terms of the what would be termed as Loyalist dissidents, I mean, a lot of those people came from, they would have been expelled from mainstream Loyalist paramilitary groupings, and they'd have been expelled for various different reasons, particularly for involving themselves or engaging in actions for personal gain, and a fair proportion of them would have been involved in the drug scene. So I mean, those to me are the kind of lowlifes that are behind a lot of these attacks. I don't see them as being politically motivated in what they're doing. What they are doing is they're exploiting a situation to hide their own activities, because they are just looking after themselves. I think in terms of, there are a specific number of people that are, I would say, somewhat naive, that are starting to follow their lane. And it's a lot of young lads that probably would have begun to join the mainstream paramilitaries pre-ceasefires. But because those dissidents are appearing to be active and exploiting situations like tense situations like the parade situations, the younger lads are easy cannon fodder for them to begin to attract and use for their attacks.
And just a few hours ago in Lurgan, another store of Loyalist pipe bombs was discovered by police. Clearly the dissidents are preparing to kill again.
Well, until quite late this afternoon, Insight was under the impression that a Northern Ireland Office Minister was going to talk to us about the state of Loyalist ceasefires. However, they've changed their mind and pulled out. They have issued a statement which says the Secretary of State this afternoon met her security advisors, including the Chief Constable, to discuss the security situation and the current status of all ceasefires. Dr. Molan will consider the advice she received very carefully and reach a judgment shortly. It would not, therefore, be appropriate to say any more at this stage. Well, Billy Hutchinson is an Assembly member for the Progressive Unionist Party, which offers political analysis to the UVF. Gary McMichael leads the Ulster Democratic Party, which does the same for the UDA and the UFF. Mr. McMichael, the IRA have broken their ceasefire, haven't they?
Well, there's speculation that the IRA weren't involved in some actions of, such as the murder of Eamon Collins.
Do you think the LVF have broken their ceasefire?
I don't know.
What about the UVF?
I don't know.
What about the UFF?
They have said they have not. And the thing about the problem we have here is that while all the speculation comes around from all different directions and going in all different directions, at the end of the day, all of the, this is all relying upon investigation from media, speculation, unauthorised or unofficially coming from security forces, or through loose talk and banter on the street. And the truth is, I don't think anyone knows the entire truth.
But for somebody who offers political analysis and advice to these people, you seem very unsure of yourself.
No, I'm not.
Surely you must know whether the ceasefire or not.
No, hold on, Mike. They said in the statement which you have used that they were not involved. That's why I say with certainty about that is true. I haven't heard anything from anyone else about this.
I don't believe it. Do you believe it?
Yeah, I believe it.
Do you believe it, Billy Hutchinson?
Well, I mean, I think when you introduced me, you said that, you know, that I represent the views of the UVF. You also left out the Red Hand Commando, who we do represent their views. I will speak confidently for them, and none of the two of them have broken ceasefires. For other organisations, I leave it up to security forces to tell as well, however, whether they haven't.
And what about individual members of those two organisations?
Well, there are no individual members who belong to the UVF or the Red Hand who are involved in any activity. I mean, I'm quite confident that any hemorrhaging that happened at the time of the LVF and not now.
And what about the suggestion in Trevor Burney's report that there's now movement in Portadown, that the UVF are to some extent trying to take control again in an area where the LVF were strong?
Well, that could possibly be true, but that doesn't mean to say you have to break a ceasefire. That's about actually making sure that you use your muscle to stop other people from moving in. Doesn't necessarily mean you break a ceasefire.
But I think the suggestion may have been that the LVF broke the ceasefire and committed a murder to try and reinforce their dominance over the UVF.
Well, that isn't the responsibility of the UVF. The UVF have enough to do in terms of holding their own discipline. They've done that very well since 1984, along with the Red Hand Commando. But if the LVF feel that they have to kill Catholics to regain dominance in a Protestant housing state, then there's something wrong with them if they believe that.
Gary McMichael, there has been hemorrhaging on your side, hasn't there?
No, I don't think that what we're seeing now is where, the dissidents that exist now, I don't think that they are sort of fragmenting away or frittering away from existing mainstream organisations. The people who are opposed to the peace process now and who are doing this kind of thing, I think they were opposed to the process all along. And I don't think that there is a fragmentation taking place within mainstream groups.
So you think they're still in the UFF?
No, I think that the people who are carrying out these attacks are people who have not been inside these organisations during this peace process. People who have been opposed to the peace process from day one and who have been preparing their opposition to it from day one.
But there is no doubt. You may say that there's a bit of paper which the UFF have given us which says we have not broken our ceasefire. Very, very few people would believe that.
I believe it.
You put your hand on your heart and you say you believe that statement.
I believe it,
with
of course.
Your knowledge, with the fact that you've mixed with these people, that you've tried to persuade them for many years that there's a different way forward. You believe that?
Mike, let me put it this way. The people here are carrying out these attacks, regardless of who you say they are, and regardless of who they are. I can assure you one thing, that I don't speak for them. They don't represent the views which I express. They do not represent the views on the positions and policy of the mainstream organisations which have supported and nurtured and indeed have been part of the formation of the peace process, because those organisations are fully committed to seeing it through to its positive conclusion. Now, what's important, which has to be dealt with here, is that those who are engaged in this kind of activity are not doing so for any reason which serves any unionist cause. What they're doing is trying to bring a society back into warfare. And I am totally, fundamentally and irreversibly opposed to that. And I believe that it is time for those organisations who are doing this to stop and to disband.
But that may include the UFF. Let me take you to the two of the major incidents, the Falls Road bars and also the bookie shop in Ardoyne. Those were two incidents where there could have been mass murders. There could have been more atrocities. Nobody's in any real doubt that was the UFF.
Well, they have said that they have not been involved.
But we don't believe
it. No, hold on, but I have to accept that.
Why do you have to accept it?
Well, there's no logic to it. There is no logic to any mainstream paramilitary organisation which is on a ceasefire, which is supportive of the peace process, to engage in this kind of activity. There is no rationale for it. There is no
particular
justification
bunch of terrorists. That particular bunch of terrorists is not on ceasefire.
They say that they are.
Your dove. Kill them all. Let God sort them out.
Mate.
You know who we're talking about.
Mate, let us be absolutely clear about this. We've been involved in this peace process. The Ulster Democratic Party has committed itself fully to the peace process, to its creation and to its nurturing. We are not going to tolerate or to represent or to be supportive of anyone who's engaged in trying to destroy that process. And there is no complacency of people playing double games. We have said that consistently, and we would not accept that. The mainstream groups say they're on ceasefire. I believe they're on ceasefire.
We've had a funeral this week. We don't need to be reminded of what goes on. You heard Jack McKee offering an analysis of why some people may be behaving in a violent manner, and he's saying that the government is paying the price. But the fact is the government doesn't pay the price. Elizabeth O'Neill pays the price. Her family pay the price.
Well, I think that's true, Mick, and I think we all should remember that. And I think particularly those people who have been elected by our society to represent them, either council or assembly, should realise that, I find it very, very interesting that whenever there was conflict going on here for 20 odd years, when people like myself was in prison, we were called scum and gangsters and murderers. And now all of a sudden people seem to think that there's some justification for this, but there was none 5, 10 years ago. So I think people need to be careful, because they're the people who are creating society and saying that this is okay to do. I think that Gary's right. The whole point about this was that the reason why mainstream loyalists came to a ceasefire in '84 was because they believed that there needed to be a way forward.
Out of time, gentlemen. Sorry about that. Out of time.
But what I was just wanting to say...
I'm sorry, we are out of time. Secretary of State is to say something shortly. Thanks for coming in. Good night.